Welcome, and thank you for joining us. I'm Jordan Rutter, Director of Public Relations for the American Bird Conservancy, and I'm really excited to talk to you about birds today. This webinar will be recorded and posted on our YouTube site for future viewing, so don't worry about missing anything in regards to notes or other information. There's also going to be a Q&A period at the end, so please feel free to submit your questions during the presentation. We ask that you use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen instead of the chat to help us stay organized and make sure we don't miss any of your questions. We'll also try to get through as many as possible, but we'll be sure to share information on how you can get in touch if you need to at the end. For those of you not as familiar with American Bird Conservancy, we're a nonprofit working to conserve native birds throughout the Americas, and we're working on saving the rarest and the most common, including the ones in your backyard. So today's webinar is winter. That's the theme. And our presenters are all great American Bird Conservancy staff. We have Andrés from the Migratory Birds team who will be sharing about migration. We have Cara from our Central Hardwoods joint venture team in Missouri, and she's going to share about how birds actually survive this cold weather. Then ABC President Mike Parr is going to share all those tips and tricks for how to attract different birds to your area during the season. So thank you again for taking the time and joining us. And Andrés, take it away.
Thanks, Jordan. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited about this webinar, and I have to be honest with all of you. I'm not a big fan of cold days, but I'm really excited about winter because winter gives you a huge opportunity to see different birds that you don't normally see during spring, summer, or fall. So by now, most of the warblers and thrushes that we know as neotropical migratory birds are in their wintering grounds in Mexico, Central, and South America. Here on the right, you can see this map that shows how the wood thrush migrates from the US to southern Mexico and Central America. Nonetheless, winter is a great time to see migratory birds, winter migrants. And if we move to the next slide, thanks. We can see how there are species that migrate from the forests of Alaska and Canada to the lower 48. We have a lot of different species that do this, and we're gonna be talking about really interesting facts about winter migration. Here we have the example of the winter wren. This little wren migrates from the forests, the coniferous, from the forest in Canada to the east coast in south of US. If we move to the next slide, please. Every year, as you know, birds migrate from their breeding grounds to their wintering grounds. So they migrate from North America to Latin America twice a year. The birds that migrate from Alaska and Canada to the lower 48, some around 4 billion birds. This means that 4 billion birds migrate from the forest in Canada, the boreal forest, that's the word I was looking for, the boreal forest, to the US. In all the migratory birds that breed in North America will migrate to Latin America, and that's around 4.7 billion birds. So yes, a lot of birds migrate to Latin America, but also the lower 48 get billions of birds that will stay here during the winter time. If we move to the next slide, another interesting thing about migration, specifically winter migration, is that those birds that migrate from Alaska in Canada to the lower 48 travel on average nearly 900 miles. That's a huge distance, right? That's a lot. That's compared to the migration of neotropical migratory birds that migrate from North America to Latin America, and those fly on average 2,000 miles. So there's a huge difference. And while birds that migrate to the lower 48 might not travel as long a distance as the neotropical birds, there are a lot of risks. So we're gonna be talking more about what we can do to help winter migratory birds. So if we move to the next slide, there's this interesting phenomenon called eruptions. And right now we're living the eruption of pine siskins. This phenomenon is caused when there's a shortage of food in the forest in Canada and Alaska. So where pines and birch trees don't produce enough food for finches and sparrows, those will travel to the lower 48 looking for food. Here we have a couple of photos of pine siskins, and right now the East Coast is full of pine siskins. So if you're a lucky one on the East Coast, you're probably seeing pine siskins on your bird feeders. So next slide, please. It doesn't matter where you are in the US, in the lower 48, it's probable that you're gonna be able to see winter migrants. For example, if you are in the Southwest, keep an eye open for Lincoln sparrows. That's a nice bird that migrates from Canada in the northern lower 48 to the Southwest. Also, if you are on the East Coast, keep an eye for yellow-bellied sapsuckers or fox sparrows, one of the nicest winter migrants. Also, if you're lucky enough during eruptions, you will be able to find evening grosbeaks in addition to other birds that happen during eruptions. So there are a lot of different ways to help winter migrants. We'll be talking more about that. And let me know if you have any questions, and we will be able to chat during the Q&A. Thanks.
Thanks, Andres. Cara is now going to tell us how birds actually survive the cold.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to dive right in and talk about strategies that birds have evolved to survive winter and migration. So overall, they need 5 things. They need fat, feathers, food, fat, feathers, friends, and finally, the shelter. And we can provide 2 of these, which support their natural adaptations and strategies they've already evolved to survive the winter. So first off, and most important maybe, is that birds use food to fuel a high body temperature and constant activity. It can fuel either that long sustained flights they need to make during migration or to stay warm on cold days. Because just like us, moving around generates body heat, and also just like us, that activity requires food for fuel. The thing that's different and special about birds is that they have an amazing ability to convert food into fat stores that they can burn for fuel during the night while they're sleeping, when food is unavailable or unpredictable, or so they don't have to stop as often during migration. So this is a picture of how we would actually see those fat stores. So kind of a fun fact of many today is that birds have clear skin, so you can actually see through it. And here you can see a bird bander is looking at the muscles through the skin. And if this bird had fat, you would see these big yellow globs of fat. And so that's something that they can do really quickly. They can store fat and then burn it within an hour. And so it's pretty extraordinary. And so again, if it was a migrating bird, they would use that fat to fly for a really long period of time, or they would use it to get through cold periods if they were a bird that didn't migrate and stayed in cold places. And so now that the birds are staying warm and have created this warmth, they have multiple strategies for keeping that warmth inside. First, they have really amazing feathers. So most birds have these sleek, air and water resistant feathers over a fluffy layer of down. And these together act together to keep that warmth in. And then they can, when it's really cold, they can fluff up like this chickadee, and that just creates even more pockets of air to protect them from the cold air on the outside. But they can also reduce heat loss during periods of inactivity and while sleeping by huddling together with their friends. So like these bluebirds in this tree cavity, a lot of different species will do this. They'll either huddle together on a branch during the day or in a cavity or in some kind of shelter at night to just share body heat and reduce that loss. And it reduces the amount of energy that they need to consume to stay warm enough to stay alive. So that brings me to the shelter. And so, you know, birds require shelter to protect them from the wind and the rain and and also from predation. So things like shrubs and trees and brush piles allow birds to escape predators during migration and in the winter. And so in addition to things helping to maintain body heat, it also protects them to escape a hawk or a predator. And so the next thing I'm going to talk about is how you can increase the shelter for your birds in your yard. And then Mike is going to talk about the food. So again, of these 5 things, we can provide food and shelter, and those 2 things help support all of these natural strategies they have to survive. And so first and maybe most important is that before you start attracting birds to your yard, you want to make sure that you've eliminated the threat. So you're not attracting them to a place that's dangerous. You want to be sure to avoid pesticides such as insecticides and rat poison that can directly poison birds, or food that they may eat, because they can eat dead insects and rats and it could then kill the bird. You want to treat your windows to prevent window strikes, and then also keep your cats inside, create something like a catio, and you know, encourage your neighbors gently if possible, and to keep their cats inside as well. Okay, and so now that your yard is nice and safe, next slide, please. We can talk about enhancing the habitat to provide this shelter. And so, so this is actually my yard, and you know, we haven't been here very long, but we've converted part of the yard into native wildflowers, and we've also planted native shrubs, and these are just wildflowers. I take back the native. And but we have planted native shrubs and plants along the house. And so providing shrubs may be the most important thing you can do, because they provide shelter and food, and again, this escape from predators. And you know, there's three examples of native shrubs: are beautyberry, sumac, and blackberries that, you know, here in Missouri, you can buy those very inexpensively from our conservation department, which is pretty amazing. And it's like 50 cents a seedling. So that can be a great way to do it. If you can do natives, they're absolutely the best thing. There's a ton of research that says natives are best. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. And then finally, because not all of us can go out and plant a bunch of shrubs and things in our yard, something like creating a brush pile, they're free and easy to create, and they're really beneficial to birds. They provide the shelter from the wind and the rain and from predators. And you can also providing free water that's not frozen really helps birds, because there's a real energetic demand to eating the snow. And so it's just another thing that means they need less food and less fuel to make it through to provide this water. And then you can also provide roost boxes, which are a place that multiple birds can huddle in together and stay warm. And so that's it.
Thanks, Cara.
Pass it off.
Yeah, thanks. Now that we've learned a little bit more about how we can help birds, Mike is going to tell us more about those tips and tricks for how to attract them.
Great. Thank you, Jordan, Cara, Andrés. Great webinar so far. Really enjoying it. So I'm very keen on birds, as you can imagine, and I've been interested in birds my whole life. I started my interest in birds when I grew up in the UK in my backyard. My mum bought me a peanut feeder when I was a kid, and we got great spotted woodpeckers on our peanut feeder, and that just really started off my enjoyment of birds. So it's been interesting. I hope everybody's safe and well during COVID. It's obviously an unprecedented time. One of the silver linings for this that I found is that it's enabled me to reconnect with birds in my backyard here in Washington, DC, in a way that I hadn't for many years, because I'm often traveling and not around the house as much. And so I've set up what I call an industrial scale bird feeding operation in my backyard, and it's been tremendous fun. And I'm excited to share some of the fun that I've had with all of you, in hopes that you can enjoy birds and feeding birds in the way that I have been. And so this slide, I've got a number of the different feeders, and these are all the feeders from my backyard. And on the left is what we call a hopper feeder, and you pour the seed in from the top. It's got a little tray around the outside, and this one has actually got these little cages on either side for suet. So that's a very popular feeder in my yard. I've got 2 or 3 hummingbird feeders, actually 2 are operational. It's a little bit late in the mid-Atlantic for hummingbirds right now, but if you're in California or in the South, parts of the South, it can still be a great time to feed hummingbirds. If you hope to feed hummingbirds and you do get a frost, there are ways to get little heaters for hummingbird feeders. But certainly when the spring comes around, it's good to have them. And if you put your hummingbird feeder up, be patient because hummingbirds will find them. It took them a while to find ours, but they did come in the end. So that was a super exciting moment and great for the kids as well. The next photograph across with the cylinders, that's what we call tube feeders. There are various different types. That particular one has got 3 together in one, a little tray at the bottom, which tends to also be a good place for birds to gather. Then on the right-hand side, this is one of the larger suet feeders. It takes a couple of bricks of suet, and I have 5 of those actually. So these are the types of feeders I have. There are some others you can get. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, woodpeckers are one of my favorite groups of birds, and actually where I'm sitting right now, looking out of my window across my laptop, I've actually been able to see a downy woodpecker while we've been on this webinar. And the downy woodpecker is the bird on the left. It's the smallest of our woodpeckers, and it's quite common across the country. If you haven't seen them yet, it's a bird you can easily attract to your yard. The secret I found for woodpeckers is suet. They seem to really love suet. And you can see on the right, you can buy suet in little bricks and put it inside these cage containers. They tend to be quite good for keeping squirrels at bay, although squirrels will get to the suet, but woodpeckers love it. The other thing you can do for woodpeckers is you can even smear some peanut butter on the bark of the tree. And not only will woodpeckers come to that, but nuthatches and even brown creepers will come to that. So there's lots of good ways to attract woodpeckers, but secret number 1 is suet. I order mine online. You can order it as a subscription, so it's delivered regularly, or buy it in any of the wild bird stores or big box retailers that have it. These are 3 of my favorite woodpeckers. The pileated is our largest. And of course, if you can attract a pileated woodpecker to your yard, we've had them here. Again, it's tremendously fun for the kids. They're big, spectacular birds, and we'll come to the larger suet feeders. So woodpeckers start with a suet. That's tip number 1. Next slide, please. So as Andrés said, right now it's super exciting because in the east, we've got a big winter finch eruption. And this is caused, as he mentioned, by a shortage of some of the pine or conifer crops in the north. So the birds will be pushed south. Now you may get goldfinches, American goldfinches or lesser goldfinches as well, and house finches at your feeder. But this slide shows some of the birds that we call the eruptive winter finches that are coming from the north to the east. Purple finches, pine siskins, common redpolls. And in particular, finches tend to like what we call Niger seeds, which is a thin black seed. It's from an African sunflower or daisy, I believe. In any case, you can buy a discrete bag of Niger seed, which tends to be really good to attract some of these finches. Particularly the siskins love it. Particularly goldfinches love it. The purple finches and house finches will go for other different types of seed. But if you look that one up, that's good. It will go in one of these tube feeders. It's a very good way to attract those. Right now, people are seeing pine siskins. People are seeing purple finches, even common redpolls, which are a little bit rarer, are coming down. They've been seen in Maryland recently near us. So we're very excited at the moment about this winter finch eruption. Number 1 secret for finches, particularly siskins and goldfinches, is that Niger seed in the tube feeders. So next slide, please. So some of the other spectacular birds that we like to see at feeders are the Grosbeaks, Cardinals, and Jays. And in the east, particularly right now, again, with the winter finch eruption, we're all excited about the possibility of seeing evening Grosbeaks. And I will be delighted if we get one here in DC. But nevertheless, Grosbeaks and Cardinals and Blue Jays tend to like tray feeders because of the way they feed. They're not quite so agile. They will like a mix of seeds. Sunflower seeds are particularly good for Grosbeaks and Cardinals. Jays will tend to eat quite a variety of different things, but a good seed mix, and I get a sort of a blend of seed with cracked corn, sunflower, some millet, one or two other things, tends to be very good for these kinds of birds. And a tray feeder, and you can have a tray at the bottom of a hopper feeder or even the tube feeder as I showed you, or just get a tray on its own and put seed on that. It can be very good for this group of birds. Next slide, please. Chickadees, nuthatches, and titmice, they really seem to like just about everything. They're quite agile. They can get into most feeders. So if you put up most of the other types of feeders, you'll see that these characters will come to your feeder. Red-breasted nuthatches are another group of birds which are eruptive, and this is again a good year for red-breasted nuthatches. So using that combination of feeders, you should be able to have a good time attracting these little characters who can be quite comical and fun to watch. Next slide, please. So with that, those are my main tips for backyard bird feeding. There's many, many others, but those are my main secrets. I'm going to turn it back over to Jordan, and thanks for joining us. I hope you have fun with birds in your yard. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. I'm sure you just created a spike in bird feeding across the country. So one of the things that we also wanted to share with you is that we're so excited for you to help birds in general and attract them to your backyard. But then there's a way you can take it a step further. You can check out resources like eBird, which is a free app that helps you actually keep track of the bird species that you're seeing. It keeps a list of all of those birds, and it contributes to really valuable science. The other thing that we wanted to share is about live feeder cams. So these are live streaming online feeder cams that are across the world, and you can go and look. Maybe you just want to see birds that you can't see in your own backyard, or maybe you don't happen to have a backyard to support birds with bird feeders, but these are great ways that you can still see birds and learn about them. Next slide, please. So just quickly, I wanted to remind folks that we are recording this webinar and we'll be posting it on our YouTube page. And I also wanted to share that we all here on the panel really do love birds and wanted to share some bird stories with you. So up first is going to be Andrés, who's going to tell you about golden crowned sparrows. Andrés, take it away.
Thanks, Jordan. Hi again, everyone. I want to share this story with all of you because it's a really exciting one. I want to talk about the golden crowned sparrow. And as you can see on the map in the middle there, you can see that this species migrates from Canada, from Alaska, northern Canada, to the West Coast in the US. And this story, my story, involves ABC senior editor, Howard Joos. It was this January, I got a message, an email from Howard, and he told me that someone found a golden crowned sparrow in Maryland. So probably 2 hours east of where we are here in DC. So during a weekend, Howard and I traveled to this rural place in Maryland to find this golden crowned sparrow. So you can imagine how this little bird traveled from the West Coast to Maryland. So he probably flew 3,000 miles. So he joined a group of white-crowned sparrows. And I guess what I want to share with you is we all should keep an eye open on those rare birds that are going to show on your feeder. Lastly here, just real quick, a quick tip is take a look at the hotspots near the place where you live. And that will help you find the latest news about the species that you're looking for. So for example, here you can see how the golden crowned sparrow have been visiting feeders in hotspots in Southern California. So let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to hearing your stories about exciting wintering birds.
And I'll just chime in and say those hotspots can be found on ebird.org. So thanks, Andrés. So Cara's up next. And Cara, I know that you love dark-eyed juncos. So can you tell us more, please?
So, yeah, so when I was a kid, I mean, my intro to birds really started with my parents having a field guide and a pair of binoculars by the back window all the time. But the one thing that my mom in particular was like, oh, that's a junco. Like they were just not worthy of notice. I don't know. And so I kind of carried that thought for a while. And then as I like started studying birds and started getting to know more and more, and I realized I'm going to all these cool places to bird, and there's juncos everywhere. They're all throughout the lower 48 all year. And there's all these different kinds of juncos. And so I really appreciated the diversity and how hardy they were to make it through the winter. And then I also realized that if you wanted to see all 13 subspecies of juncos, so everybody's junco in this call probably looks a little different, your wintering bird. This is mine right here, the slate-colored junco. One of my jobs actually was the Oregon junco. And so if you had a goal to see all 13 species of juncos in the US, if you wanted to set a birding goal, you would at sometimes be seeing trogons with yellow-eyed juncos. You'd be seeing, I could go on, like really amazing birds along the way. And so I really recommend you watch your juncos and appreciate them, how hard they work to survive the winter, and try to see some more of these other species because they'll take you to some really amazing places. Oh, and the other thing is that, like Andrés said, watch the juncos at your feeder because there are 13 subspecies, and by looking, you know, there might be one that looks different, and so you might just get one of those in your backyard too.
Thanks, Cara. So Mike, I know that for you, winter means snow. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when you asked about winter bird stories, my mind immediately went to what I think of as the quintessential winter birds, which for me are the birds that have snow in their name. And we've got 6 birds in North America that have snow in their name. It's not always associated with snow and winter. Some of them, like the snowy egret, it's more to do with their plumage. But these 3 birds for me kind of encapsulate winter in a way that other birds don't quite, because they're all white and they are to me, the real winter birds. And if you get into birding this winter and you want to branch out beyond your backyard, you may get an opportunity to see each one of these 3 birds sometime during this winter. I'll start with the middle one, the snow goose, which just about everybody I would hope would be within striking distance of where they might be able to find a snow goose. Snow geese form very large flocks in winter, and they feed in agricultural fields, and they tend to roost in coastal wetlands or on lakes around areas where they can avoid predators. And if you go to National Wildlife Refuge, a lot of the refuges along the Delaware Bay, for example, Sacramento Valley, Texas coast, some parts of Arizona and New Mexico, tremendously good for snow geese. And of course, the western, the smaller Ross's goose might be with those, but they're just wonderful. They have this evocative sound, and it's wonderful to watch these large flocks fly overhead. It really just kind of summarizes winter for me. Snowy owls are also eruptive, like some of these other finches we've spoken about, and their eruptions are tied to the lemming cycle. I don't think we know yet whether there's going to be a snowy owl year this year, but if there isn't one this year, there'll be one soon. And the snowy owls can often show up in unusual places, like even in cities. We had one inside Washington, D.C., or large airports. But again, if you look on eBird or use the Bird's Eye app, which you can download from the App Store, and look for snowy owl, you may find a place near you where there is a snowy owl. Obviously, it's a little easier in the north, but you can see on the map just about there's a dotted line, which shows you where the eruptions go down to, kind of roughly the mid part of the country. Snow buntings are a little bit similar. They tend to like large open fields. And again, looking on eBird or looking at the Bird's Eye app, you can sometimes find flocks of snow buntings. They also have these beautiful calls, little fluting types of calls, and they often mix in with horned larks. So those are my sort of 3 winter birds that if I see all those 3 birds in a winter, I really know that I've done some winter birding. And I hope that once you kind of branch out, or maybe already branching out from backyard bird feeding, you might look out for those 3 characters this winter, and hopefully you'll see at least one of them. So enjoy the birding, and I'll turn it back over to Jordan. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So we're going to move into our Q&A portion of this webinar. And we're going to start off with one of the most frequent questions we got during registration, which was tips for birds and feeding birds without a backyard. So I personally currently live in an apartment on the top floor. And so the picture on the left is actually my not balcony. I have about 6 inches and then that's it. And so my point to you is don't overlook the possibilities of how you can support birds. I got these window planters and actually have a variety of herbs and let them flower, and had a hummingbird on the top floor of my apartment come and drink from the flowers of my oregano. And that inspired me to actually get a hummingbird feeder that I hung from the railing there. And then I started getting some jays, and I even had a downy woodpecker at one time. So now I have 4 different feeders. From left to right, I have the hummingbird feeder. Then I have a suet feeder, which as Mike said, is great for those woodpeckers. The sock looking thing on the center right is a thistle feeder. It has Niger seed because I'm really hopeful for those winter finches even on the top floor of my apartment. And then on the most right is a peanut feeder. So it's another great generalist feeder, and I've had everything from house sparrows and starlings to even a white-breasted nuthatch and tufted titmouse. So my point again is just to encourage you to not overlook what's possible, even if you don't have a backyard of your own. The picture on the right is actually from Cara. So Cara, if you want to jump in, but this is, again, there are a lot of creative options where if you don't have a yard, that you can get feeders that actually stick to windows, and you can support birds that way as well. So we just wanted to really make sure that everyone knows that even if you don't have the resources that you think you need to help birds, you can do something, and it's awesome and a great way to attract birds to your area and keep appreciating them. Cara, do you have anything else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, before I had the house in my picture, I lived in a string of apartments for years and years and years, and I always had bird feeders, no matter what. And, you know, in this house, I didn't even have a balcony. I was on the 2nd floor, and all I had was sliding windows. And I was lucky enough that my backyard was a nature area, but I still didn't have a yard. And so I had so many suction cup window feeders. I had like hanging platform feeders, like every feeder that Mike described, I had stuck to these windows at some point. And all year, all summer, all winter. And I did learn how to keep squirrels off, although I do think they did learn that if they jumped on them and pulled it off, they could pull the whole thing to the ground and then eat it. But I did win eventually over the squirrels, and it was amazing. You can do a lot with just suction cup window feeders on your window, assuming it's safe to take the screen out and lean out very far to put your feeders in. So don't despair. I had those tiny little suet feeders like Mike showed. At this particular apartment, I had 5 species of woodpeckers, including pileated, coming to those tiny little suet feeders. So I did have a really basically nature area in my backyard, but I did not have a yard and I did not have a balcony. And so you can create shelter on balconies. Jordan, like you said, like I left my Christmas tree out on my balcony in one apartment, and I had chipping sparrows roosting there at night and then getting up in the morning and eating the seeds. So be creative. You can do it.
Yep, that's great. Thanks, Cara. Just because I am seeing some comments in the chat, I do want to emphasize that plants are a great alternative in case your apartment or condo don't allow bird feeders specifically, because as I mentioned, a hummingbird actually came to the flowering plants there. So that's a great alternative, but also a great way just to naturally and natively support birds. And I also wanted to point out that my hummingbird feeder is red, and it's eroding because of hitting the railing at times and just storms. But I personally don't use red dye. It's just a mixture of water and sugar. So the red is really helpful for attracting the hummingbirds, but I don't use dye. So again, we're gonna move in now to the actual live Q&A portion, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. And if not, we're gonna share our website and email address so that you can follow up. And again, this is being recorded, so don't worry if you miss any information. So first up, one of the common questions we've been getting throughout this presentation is regarding how to actually help treat your windows to prevent window collisions. So Mike, would you mind sharing about all the resources on our website, birdsmartglass.org?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's lots of good ways to do that. As you probably know, there are two main reasons that birds collide with windows. One is that they see some vegetation reflected in the window, or the other one is that they don't see glass. And when I talk about the fact that humans don't see glass either, people often do a double take, and I did when I first heard that. And of course, I realized if I could see glass, my glasses wouldn't work. And what it is that humans, we see all the stuff that goes around a window, and we know it's a window. But if it's a clean glass window, it's been well cleaned, birds just don't see it, and they might try and fly through, especially if they're trying to escape a predator. But if you have some kind of visual cue on the glass, that can deter a bird from striking it. Even at the last minute, they realize that it's not something they can go through. So if you go to our website, www.abcbirds.org, and click on the section, the threat section, it'll take you to a section on collisions. And we have great information in there on the types of treatments you can put on windows. Everything from a curtain of monofilament lines, which you can hang down, to tape that you can put on, or various types of decals. One thing that is a common thing that people see is hawk decals. Our research shows that birds don't really recognize the hawks themselves, but anything that breaks up the silhouette, breaks up the reflection of the glass, or the paint, the size of the pane, is good. So they will work if you use enough of them. In most houses, you'll find that it's really mainly one window or a couple of windows that are the problem. So the first thing to do is really, if you know which those windows are, treat those windows. Don't worry about doing absolutely everything. Start with the windows where you have the problem, and that will definitely be really, really helpful. But just make sure you've got enough decals up. And if you think, well, it's going to interrupt the view we have decals up. We have actually bird tape on our front window. You just don't notice it after a while. And pretty much everybody I've spoken to have even different types of window treatments. You just don't really see them. What you do is you see through the window. You're not looking at the glass. So for the most part, it's not really going to interrupt your view, and it can be very effective. So abcbirds.org, go on there. If you have any more specific questions, we have a team that works on this issue. We do testing of materials to ensure their efficacy for bird collision avoidance. We'd be delighted to give you some specific advice if you let us know what kind of specific problem you're dealing with. But the website will be a great place to go and look for information on what you can do with your windows.
Thanks, Mike. So the next question is really geared to Andrés, but of course Mike and Cara can join in. There's a question about the fires currently out west and how they will impact the range of birds and wintering of birds.
Right, that's a great question, and we keep learning about it, right? Because all of this is happening, but we have definitely seen some phenomena of species leaving their breeding grounds earlier, so migrating earlier. So we still have a lot to learn. You probably saw this phenomenon that happened in New Mexico of a lot of birds dying. So we have a great blog on our website. So take a look at that, and that will give you some ideas of what's happening there in the West. Yeah. Oh, Mike, I think you're on mute. Yes.
I knew for some reason I would eventually mute myself accidentally. Apologies for that. That's a great answer, Andrés. I'd just like to add to that. Obviously, this has been an especially bad fire season, but there can be a slight silver lining for some birds, because there are many birds that depend on fires in forest for the regeneration of the forest, and even some burnt trees can be very good for some of the woodpecker species like the white-headed woodpecker, the Williamson sapsucker. Even spotted owls will use edges of burned forest, and we've probably got due to fire suppression, a sort of a catch-up situation that needs to happen. And while it's really worrying to see, and of course the damage that's done and any life loss is really tragic. So I don't mean to minimize that, but at least for some birds, there is a silver lining to some of this, that once those fires do happen, it does create a habitat that they can recover into. So there's going to be some winners and losers in this. And I agree with Andres, we need to get more information to really see what's happened. I don't think we've got the necropsy results yet from the birds that were killed to see exactly what it was that caused it. But we think it's mostly due to a cold snap, and lack of insects seems to be the most likely explanation for that. But check out the blog again on the website. As Andres said, there's a lot more explanation there. It's a really good blog written by John Mittermeier, who was in New Mexico while this was going on. Be a good place to look.
Thanks so much. So Cara, I'd like to ask the next question of you, and that is, can you tell us more about the roost boxes?
Oh, yes. So roost boxes are really similar to birdhouses, but they have, the hole is at the bottom of the front of the house. And that's because, so the heat rises and it doesn't come out of the top. So it just helps retain heat. And they'll also have multiple perches inside so that, you know, more birds actually have perches inside, which a nest box is not. And roost boxes will vary depending on what species you want to target. The cutest thing that I read while researching this was that you can build, like chickadees, they roost individually. They don't get along. And if you've ever bird banded, you know that they're not nice, very aggressive. They actually wedge themselves in these tiny little cavities. And that's why if you ever see a bird at your chickadee, your feeder with a tail that's kind of bent to the side, it's because it's like wedged itself in this tiny hole. And so they recommend, I found this website that had dimensions, so you could build these tiny little roost boxes just for individual chickadees, and you could like line them up in your backyard. So if you just Google it, there's a ton of options to buy them commercially, the same place people that sell nest boxes, sell roost boxes. So it's definitely something I'm going to add this year. I'm kind of excited about it.
Thanks so much. Another question we're getting is about predators as well as nuisance for bird feeding. So raccoons, snakes, foxes, falcons, and so on. So Mike and Cara, since we know you both have backyards right now, can you speak to how you help with that?
Do you want to take that one, Cara?
I take part of it. So we have a raccoon that discovered our bird feeders at night, and it turned out kind of accidentally that our wind chimes turned into the raccoon alarm, so that we knew to go bring the feeders in at night. So that was a big thing. It's kind of a pain, but that's what we had to do. So it was like anytime the wind chime started going crazy, we knew that the raccoon was in the feeder. But I mean, so we're talking about raccoons and bears and then predators. I think the thing about predators, so I saw some comments about trying to snakes and things. They're native animals and they're part of the ecosystem. And so that's not something I worry about encouraging or deterring. They're all wildlife, and I want to create wildlife habitat. So that's my point of view on that. And so I know that some people just want the birds. But I think that with bears and raccoons and those nocturnal predators, bringing your feeders in at night is really important and can help, especially bears. I mean, the raccoon is kind of expensive, but the bear is a little more dangerous. Nuisance birds, I mean, I think in the past, what I've done is I've just bought the cheaper food, honestly, like cracked corn and whatnot, and kind of thrown it somewhere away from the feeders so the house sparrows and the starlings can go there. And I just do my best, but half of the point of the bird feeders is cat TV, and the cats don't care if it's a house sparrow or a starling. So people that live in more urban areas might have more of something to say about deterring the problematic birds. Mike, do you have any tips?
Yeah. We have all of those issues here. The squirrels, you can get squirrel-proof feeders and ones that spin around. I didn't get those. My strategy for squirrels is just overwhelm the squirrels with number of feeders. And so that's my strategy. I've got so many feeders that, there's always some room for the birds, and not everybody can do that. But I've heard that the ones that spin around can be effective. I have a squirrel baffle. My wife put some olive oil on it, and just so it make it even more tricky for the squirrels, which seems to have worked. Of course, it's non-toxic and would just be fine. And it seems to have helped, but I can't swear that that's a real solution. But you can get the baffle, which makes it a little harder, but squirrels are just very ingenious. They can get to just about anything. So that's been my strategy for squirrels. We have not had raccoon problems. I know for bears, I've heard that the best thing to do is just take the feeders down for a while and the bears will go away. But if they persist, of course, that's quite challenging. For us, the biggest problem is cats. We have at least 7 different cats that roam our neighborhood. I don't know who owns them, so I'm not able to really sort of address that with neighbors. I think I see them moving around this neighborhood. In our case, my boys are sensitive to that. They have a broom near the back door, and one boy walking out with a broom, the cats flee. There's no need to do anything else. You can, of course, trap them and take them to a shelter is another option. But the ideal thing is to really, encourage everybody to keep their cats indoors. And if you have a cat and it goes outdoors, I would encourage you to think about trying to make it an indoor cat. Again, if you go to ABC's website, there's a variety of tools that we have to encourage cats to find enjoyment and things to play with inside to make up from being outside where they could be threatening birds and other wildlife. So those are some of the experiences I've personally had. And of course, there are other predators. Raptors, again, I would say, Cara's right, that there is a sense in which maybe bird feeding doesn't elevate the population of raptors, but I think raptors are coming back really from a long-term decline. And it's nice to see raptors like Cooper's hawks doing well. It's bucking the trend a little bit, but I doubt that that's really having much of a conservation impact. We really need to look to habitat and some of these other threats to be the drivers of that rather than the natural predation.
Thank you, everyone.
I will just say that I've had really good luck with squirrels with that just inexpensive $20 bird feeder that has the cage that pulls down and pulls the little oak leaves. Mike had a picture of it. I think it's been swapped out. You can buy it at Walmart, and I've had probably 10 of those over the years, and I have had a lot of success with the squirrels. Have not figured it out until now. One is chewing through it, but it's been like 15 years before. And so you don't have to spend a ton of money to find something that stays ahead of them.
Yeah, it's amazing what squirrels can chew through. I was storing most of my bird seed outside in a very large hard-topped plastic container, which they had made serious inroads into chewing through. So yeah, they're quite capable of getting through even fairly serious plastic. So I wouldn't recommend keeping seed outside. We have stopped doing that as a result.
Okay, next question. The next question is about bird feeder maintenance, such as cleaning and how regularly you maintain your feeders. So if anyone wants to jump in, I know, Mike, you have your boys to help out. So if you want to go first.
Yeah, I understand the recommendation is that you soak them in a very mild bleach solution. You can get a combination for that. I think it's 9-to-1 or something like that, but look it up online. I've mostly looked out for whether, the main concern is the house finch eye disease. And so you want to keep an eye out for that. And if you see any house finches that have got anything apparently wrong with their eyes, you may want to take your feeders down at that point and clean all your feeders in bleach. Don't use too much bleach, but use the combination that's recommended. That's what we've done. And so far, I've only cleaned them once recently before we put them back up. We'll see how that goes. But so far, we're using them every day, and we haven't seen any outbreaks of disease. And I think that seems to be the recommended strategy. So unless Cara or Andrés have got anything, there's plenty of information online about clean and maintenance of feeders. But I would certainly make sure that you do it somewhat regularly. And I understand, I wouldn't say I'm an expert on that. I've just read online the best way to do it, but that is what I understand to be the best thing. And I just use a large container and soak them in it for a while and then put them somewhere where they're away from where birds are going to be, let them dry completely. And after that, you can put the seed in them and they should be good.
Yeah, I don't have anything. The only thing I would add is that I do let my feeders get all the way empty or dump out before I fill it, because otherwise, if you just keep topping it off, that bottom layer it can just sit there for a long time. So you want to make sure that you're not letting the bottom of the seed be there for months and months.
Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with the bottom layer getting there. Right in my yard right now, there's an absolute huge flock of birds and actually a lot of squirrels at my feeders, which I can see right now. And that, I mean, the seed goes down very, very rapidly here. It's coming in through the front door and going out through the back door in a pretty much constant succession, which is a lot of fun.
Thanks. Yeah, so on a related note, as Cara mentioned about the actual seed, that also relates to hummingbird feeders. And so even if you don't have a hummingbird for a while, it's important to change out that sugar water so that it doesn't go moldy as well. And so I raised this as a transition to go back to our panelists to talk about supporting hummingbirds during the winter. We have a few more questions about just digging into that question, Mike. So if you want to kick off with just a little bit more about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've probably covered it somewhat. I mean, most of the country is not going to have hummingbirds in the winter. So really along, let's say starting in Texas, I mean, people might get a few ruby throats or rufous hummingbirds elsewhere, but starting in Texas into Arizona and up through California, that's going to be the place for hummingbirds in winter. For the most part, those states aren't going to get a lot of problems with frozen nectar. But if there are frosts, I don't have one, but I think you can get online some information about how you get I think there's a lamp you can use to keep your hummingbird feeder, just keep the temperature of the solution just above freezing, because obviously that's not going to be good. But I'm going to keep my hummingbird feeders out during the winter because, you know, the rufous hummingbirds have started to occupy areas a little bit more east of their original range. Most of them went to Mexico, but with the feeders, they're now spending more time in places in the US. And we're starting to see them show up occasionally in places like Maryland. There was one at the Smithsonian in DC a number of years ago coming to feed us down in DC itself. So you might just keep them out in case one of these rare hummingbirds, like Andrés was talking about the golden crowned sparrow, you might get a rare hummingbird. My friend Jeff Russenau in Wisconsin had a buff-bellied hummingbird at his feeder, the first ever seen in Wisconsin. So these kind of crazy things can happen, and that's some of the real fun that we have in birding. I think there was one in Bolinas in California. I'm trying to remember, I think it was a white-eared hummingbird from Mexico was photographed at a feeder there. So I'm going to keep mine going as long as I can, but you would definitely want to keep that solution liquid during the winter. And if not, you may want to take them down.
Thanks, Mike. So we have folks that are so engaged and enthusiastic, which is awesome that we're already looking ahead to more of the spring season. And I say that because the next question is about woodpeckers drilling on your house. And so that is typically breeding season behavior. And so I'd love for the speakers to both share how do you prevent this from happening, as well as other woodpecker facts.
Has anybody got a special secret to this one?
I'll chime in that I've always heard that if you put tin foil or even pie tins hanging, both the shine and the noise help prevent woodpeckers from pecking on that area. And I've heard that they do that because usually that pecking is either on, say, a spout pipe that makes it really loud. So it's a really good way for them to be like, I'm the best, I'm here, I'm ready to breed. Or they think that it's really good for food. So that's what I've heard. But how about you panelists?
Yeah, I'm not sure I've got any special secret to this one. You know, if you've got a wooden house and there's lots of different wood that's exposed, they could move around, but woodpeckers tend to like particular spots for different reasons. So if you can find out the area that they're using, some of those deterrents, like, you know, the string on the cans on string and things like that, sound like that would be a really good idea. I know that acorn woodpeckers like to create larder trees where they make holes and then they hide acorns in them. And if they decide your house is a larder tree, that could definitely be a bit of an issue. So I would certainly try and deter them with some foil or something like that before they continue, because there are plenty of trees out there. But you know, I find woodpeckers endlessly fascinating. We had a great time last winter where I was out with the boys in the local park, and we heard a yellow-bellied sapsucker calling, and we started looking for it, and it was super fun because we heard it calling, and then we found the places where the sapsucker had drilled into a tree, and of course they make the holes, then they come back later to drink the sap from the tree. So it was like a detective experience where we heard the bird, then we found the holes, and then finally we did see the sapsucker. So, you know, woodpeckers, I forgive them for those kind of things, but I know that can be irritating. I think Jordan's answer is probably about the best one. If you can find the place where the woodpeckers decided to peck and try and do something to deter it, of course, you know, don't do anything, hopefully, that would harm the woodpecker. But, you know, the good news is it will be temporary and probably mostly in spring.
I think that part of finding out how to stop it is to figure out why they're doing it. Are they drumming in the spring in order to call territory? So woodpeckers drum, they bang on trees for multiple reasons. So if they're calling territory, then deterrence would hopefully make them find somewhere else. If they're drumming on your house because they're eating insects, then they're basically telling you that something's eating your house and you should probably do something about that and to get the wood-boring insects out. If they're excavating a nest cavity, that's probably the biggest, well, another big, so you could put up nest boxes, probably a flicker, and you could put up nest boxes and provide another option for them to nest in. So there's not one answer for all of them because there's multiple reasons that woodpeckers make that noise. Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna have one last question just given time, and then we'll unfortunately need to wrap up. So this question is about domestic birds and animals, and if it's okay to feed wild birds in the same area. So specifically, if there's any interactions between domestic chickens and wild birds, or again, our pets. We did go over cats and some of the solutions that you can find on our website, but if anyone wants to speak to that as well.
There are some diseases that could be transmitted between poultry and wild birds. I think I'm not an expert, don't really know the answer, but my gut says I would certainly try and keep the areas somewhat separate. There's a kind of, there's a foot disease in particular that can affect chickens, that can affect wild birds. It's not very common, but yeah, I'd instinctively think it would be better to keep the areas separate, but I don't think there's anything absolute that says you can't do that. Anyone else got a thought on that one? I think just mixing domestic animals and wildlife in general is probably, I would avoid it as much as possible, but I don't think that means that if you have a farm, you can't have bird feeders. But I probably wouldn't put it over the poultry areas. I'd separate that. But I'm not an expert. I would recommend just looking up online a little bit more about that one. But I do know there are some diseases that can be passed between poultry and birds. So I think avoiding direct contact would certainly be for the best.
Sounds good. Well, I want to take this time to thank our panelists. Thank you so much for all of your information that you've shared today. And to those folks that are joining us, I want to encourage you to check out our website, abcbirds.org, for more information about what you've heard today or just learn more about our organization. And if you like this webinar and want to learn more about, again, ABC in general, or sign up for our emails to get alerts for future webinars or ways that you can help birds too, just make sure that you reach out and connect with us. We really appreciate your support. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks very much, everybody. Great job, panelists.
Thank you, everyone.